Have you ever finished an entire day feeling exhausted, yet strangely unable to explain what you actually accomplished? You woke up early, you answered messages, you attended meetings, you moved from task to task, responding to requests, checking notifications, reacting to new demands as they appeared on your screen. By all conventional standards, it was a productive day. And yet, when the day finally ends, a quiet question begins to surface. What did I really do today? This feeling is becoming increasingly common. A peculiar form of exhaustion that is not simply physical, but mental. A fatigue that lingers even after the work has stopped. Not the satisfying tiredness that follows meaningful effort, but a dull and confusing emptiness. Many people assume this feeling must be a personal problem. Perhaps they lack discipline. Perhaps they need better habits. Perhaps they simply aren't managing their time correctly. Modern culture has made one message very clear. If you feel overwhelmed, distracted, or exhausted, the solution is simple. You must become more productive. So we download new productivity apps, we watch videos about morning routines, we organize our schedules with increasing precision. Every minute is tracked, every task is categorized, every goal is broken down into measurable steps. At first, this seems logical. After all, productivity promises control. It promises efficiency. It promises the ability to accomplish more with less effort. And yet something strange continues to happen. Despite all these tools designed to make life easier, people are not feeling calmer. They are not feeling more fulfilled. If anything, the opposite appears to be true. The more we try to optimize our time, the more fragmented our days seem to become. The modern worker moves through an endless sequence of tasks that rarely feel complete. Emails generate more emails. Meetings generate more meetings. Notifications multiply faster than they can be answered. The day becomes a constant flow of reactions. One moment responding to a message. The next moment reviewing a document. Then quickly switching to another task before the first one has even fully ended. At some point, the distinction between working and simply responding begins to blur. You are constantly active, yet strangely unable to point to anything that feels deeply finished. This is not laziness. This is not a lack of discipline. It is something far more subtle. Modern productivity culture has quietly transformed the nature of work itself. Without most people realizing it, the meaning of productivity has slowly shifted. It is no longer measured by the depth or significance of what we create. Instead, it is measured by something far more visible: activity. The modern professional is expected to be constantly reachable, constantly responsive, constantly moving from one obligation to another without pause. Silence has become suspicious. Stillness is interpreted as inefficiency. The ideal worker, according to modern systems, is someone who is always engaged with something, always answering, always reacting, always busy. At first glance, this might seem like progress. Technology has allowed us to communicate faster than ever before. Information travels instantly. Workflows have been optimized in ways that would have seemed impossible only a few decades ago. But beneath this surface of efficiency, a quiet transformation has taken place. Work has become increasingly fragmented. Instead of long periods of focused thinking, the modern mind is now trained to operate in rapid bursts of attention. Each interruption pulls the mind away from deeper thought, forcing it to constantly reset its focus. Over time, this pattern begins to shape the way the brain functions. Deep concentration becomes harder to sustain. Ideas struggle to fully develop. Thoughts remain incomplete, interrupted before they have the chance to mature into something meaningful. And slowly, almost invisibly, a strange form of exhaustion begins to emerge. Not the exhaustion of hard labor, but the exhaustion of a mind that has been pulled in too many directions for too long. A mind that has forgotten what it feels like to stay with a single thought long enough for it to truly unfold. This is the silent paradox of modern productivity. The system designed to help us accomplish more may be quietly destroying the very conditions that make meaningful accomplishment possible. But to understand how this happened, we must look deeper into the origins of the productivity myth itself. Because the idea that human beings must always be productive did not appear overnight. It was carefully built into the structure of modern society. And once you begin to see how this system works, it becomes impossible to ignore the profound psychological consequences it has created. To understand why modern life feels so relentlessly busy, we must look at how the idea of productivity itself was transformed. For most of human history, work followed a very different rhythm. Farmers worked according to the seasons. Artisans devoted long hours to the slow process of crafting something meaningful. Scholars spent days, sometimes months, immersed in contemplation before producing a single piece of writing. Work was not measured by constant activity. It was measured by outcomes. A harvest, a finished tool, a completed book. Between these periods of effort, there were natural pauses, moments of rest, time for reflection, time for the mind to wander and reorganize itself. The human mind evolved within these rhythms. But everything began to change during the rise of the industrial world. Factories introduced a completely new model of work. Instead of focusing on finished creations, productivity became tied to continuous output. Machines did not rest, and therefore workers were expected to follow the same rhythm. Efficiency became the central goal. Every movement was measured. Every process was optimized. Every minute of inactivity was viewed as waste. Human labor slowly began to resemble the operation of machines. And although modern knowledge work looks very different from factory labor, the underlying philosophy never truly disappeared. It simply evolved. Today, most people no longer work on assembly lines. They work in offices, on laptops, inside digital systems that promise flexibility and autonomy. But the invisible logic of industrial productivity remains deeply embedded in these environments. The modern worker may not operate machinery, but they are still evaluated according to a similar principle: constant output. In practice, this means something very specific. You must always appear active. Emails must be answered quickly. Messages must be acknowledged immediately. Meetings must be attended, even when they contribute little to the actual progress of meaningful work. The modern workplace is filled with signals that communicate a single expectation: stay busy, stay visible, stay responsive. At first glance, this seems harmless. After all, communication is necessary for collaboration. Coordination requires information exchange. But something subtle begins to happen when responsiveness becomes the primary measure of productivity. Work gradually shifts away from creation and toward reaction. Instead of focusing on producing something thoughtful and complete, the modern worker spends much of the day managing an endless stream of incoming demands. A message arrives. It must be answered. A request appears. It must be addressed. A meeting is scheduled. Attendance is expected. Each individual task may seem small, even insignificant, but together they form a continuous current that pulls the mind from one direction to another. Over time, this pattern reshapes how attention itself is used. Deep concentration begins to feel unfamiliar. Silence becomes uncomfortable. Moments without external input start to feel almost unnatural, as if something important might be happening somewhere else. The mind becomes conditioned to expect interruption. And once this conditioning takes hold, something even more troubling begins to occur. The absence of busyness starts to feel like failure. If the inbox is quiet, we become uneasy. If the calendar is empty, we feel unproductive. The system has trained us to equate activity with value. But activity alone does not guarantee meaningful progress. In fact, the constant pressure to remain busy often produces the opposite effect. When the mind is forced to divide its attention across dozens of small demands, it becomes increasingly difficult to sustain the type of thinking that leads to genuine insight. Complex ideas require time. Creative solutions require space. But the modern productivity system offers very little of either. Instead, it creates an environment where the mind is perpetually occupied, yet rarely fully engaged. This is the quiet transformation that lies at the heart of modern work culture. Human beings were once valued for their ability to think deeply, to solve complex problems, to produce ideas that required patience and concentration. Now, more often than not, they are valued for their ability to keep up with the flow, to respond quickly, to stay connected, to remain available. And while this system may appear efficient on the surface, it carries a hidden cost that is rarely discussed. Because when attention is constantly fragmented, the human mind begins to change in ways that are not immediately visible. The consequences unfold slowly. But once they begin, they reshape not only how we work, but how we think. And this is where the true psychological impact of productivity culture begins to reveal itself. Once productivity became synonymous with constant activity, the structure of work began to change in ways that were subtle but profound. At first, these changes seemed harmless. After all, modern technology promised to make work faster and more efficient. Emails allowed instant communication. Messaging platforms made collaboration easier. Digital tools ensured that no task would ever be forgotten. Everything became connected. Everything became immediate. And slowly, the modern workday began to transform into something very different from what the human mind was designed to handle. Instead of long stretches of uninterrupted focus, the day became divided into fragments. Small interruptions began to appear everywhere. An email notification appears on the screen. Before finishing the current task, the mind shifts toward the message. A quick response is sent. Then attention returns to the original task. But something has already changed. The flow has been broken. Moments later, another message appears. Then a meeting reminder. Then a new request from a colleague. Each interruption may last only a few seconds. But every interruption forces the mind to perform a difficult transition. It must disengage from one thought and redirect itself toward another. Then return. Then redirect again. Then return once more. At first, this seems manageable, but over the course of an entire day, these constant shifts accumulate into something far more disruptive. The mind never truly settles. Thoughts begin to form, but are abandoned halfway through. Ideas appear briefly, but vanish before they can be explored. Complex problems remain unresolved because the attention required to solve them is repeatedly interrupted. The result is a peculiar mental state. The individual feels busy, yet mentally scattered, active, yet strangely unproductive. And perhaps most troubling of all, this pattern slowly begins to reshape the brain's relationship with attention itself. Deep focus starts to feel unfamiliar. Tasks that require sustained concentration become difficult to maintain. The mind searches for stimulation, scanning for the next notification, the next message, the next interruption. Silence becomes uncomfortable. Stillness feels unnatural. Even when interruptions stop, the mind continues behaving as if another one might appear at any moment. It remains on alert. This constant alertness creates a background tension that many people experience but rarely understand. It is not the stress of a single demanding task. It is the stress of endless partial attention. The mind is never allowed to fully engage with anything, yet it is never allowed to fully rest either. Instead, it exists in a state of continuous readiness, always prepared to respond, always waiting for the next signal. Over time, this state begins to produce a quiet but powerful form of cognitive fatigue. The mind becomes tired not because it has worked deeply, but because it has been forced to repeatedly start and stop. Start and stop. Like an engine that is constantly turned on and off, never allowed to run long enough to reach a steady rhythm. This is the hidden cost of fragmented work. It slowly erodes the mind's capacity for sustained thought. And when sustained thought disappears, something even more essential begins to fade with it. Creativity. Creative ideas rarely appear during moments of frantic activity. They require mental space. They require patience. They often emerge when the mind is allowed to follow a thought further than usual, exploring connections that are not immediately obvious. But when attention is constantly interrupted, those connections never have the chance to fully form. Ideas remain incomplete. Insights remain shallow. Work becomes functional rather than meaningful. And gradually, a strange transformation begins to occur within the individual. They begin to doubt their own intellectual abilities. They assume their difficulty concentrating must be a personal flaw. They believe they have become less disciplined, less intelligent, less capable. But in many cases, the truth is far simpler. Their mind has not become weaker. It has simply been placed inside an environment that continuously prevents it from doing what it evolved to do. To think slowly, to think deeply, to remain with a single idea long enough for it to reveal something new. Instead, the modern productivity system rewards the exact opposite behavior. Rapid responses, constant availability, endless movement between tasks. And as this pattern becomes normalized, an entire culture begins to emerge around a single powerful belief that being busy is not only necessary, but admirable. At some point, something unusual began to happen in modern society. Being busy stopped being a problem. It became a symbol. Listen carefully to the way people talk about their lives today. When someone asks how we are doing, the response is often immediate. I've been incredibly busy. Work has been crazy. I barely have time to breathe. These phrases are rarely spoken with embarrassment. In many cases, they are expressed with a subtle sense of pride. Busyness has become a signal that a person is important, a signal that they are in demand, a signal that their time is valuable. The logic behind this cultural shift is easy to understand. In a world where productivity is treated as the ultimate virtue, constant activity becomes a way of demonstrating personal worth. If you are always busy, it must mean that you are needed, that you are productive, that your presence matters. But beneath this social performance lies a quiet and troubling reality. Many people who appear extremely busy are not necessarily producing anything deeply meaningful. Their days are filled with movement, yet very little progress. This happens because busyness often disguises a different kind of work entirely. Maintenance, responding to messages, managing requests, updating documents, attending meetings. These activities are not meaningless in themselves. They are part of the infrastructure that allows organizations to function. But when they begin to dominate the entire workday, something essential disappears. Creation. Meaningful work requires time. Not just time in the abstract, but time that is protected from interruption. Time that allows the mind to move beyond immediate reactions and explore ideas in greater depth. But in a culture that glorifies busyness, such time becomes increasingly rare. Moments of quiet concentration begin to look suspicious. A worker who spends long periods thinking, without visibly responding to messages, may appear inactive. They may seem disconnected from the constant flow of communication that defines modern productivity. And so the pressure to remain visible intensifies. The inbox must be answered quickly. The message must receive an immediate reply. The meeting must be attended, even if its purpose is unclear. Each response serves as proof of engagement, proof that the individual is participating in the endless circulation of activity that defines modern work culture. Slowly, the system begins to reward a very specific type of behavior, not depth, not originality, but speed. The ability to respond instantly becomes more valuable than the ability to think carefully. The person who replies within seconds appears more productive than the person who spends an hour reflecting before offering a thoughtful response. Over time, this dynamic begins to reshape the psychological environment of the workplace. People feel compelled to stay connected at all times, even during moments of rest. Even outside working hours, phones remain within reach. Notifications remain active. The boundary between work and personal life begins to dissolve. The mind never fully disconnects from the system of constant responsiveness that defines modern productivity. And gradually, something very important begins to fade. Rest. Not simply physical rest, but mental rest. The type of rest that allows the mind to wander without purpose. The type of rest that allows ideas to emerge naturally. Without it, the inner life begins to shrink. The mind becomes increasingly oriented toward tasks, deadlines, and incoming demands. Life starts to feel like a sequence of obligations rather than an open field of possibilities. And in this environment, even moments that should bring satisfaction begin to feel strangely hollow. You complete the task, you answer the message, you attend the meeting, but the feeling of genuine accomplishment never fully arrives. Instead, another request appears, another notification, another demand for attention. The cycle continues, and because everyone else seems to be moving just as quickly, few people stop to question whether this endless activity is actually producing the type of work that truly matters. Busyness has become the norm, and once a culture accepts busyness as a virtue, it becomes extremely difficult to recognize the deeper psychological cost it carries. Because beneath the surface of constant activity, the human mind is slowly paying a price that is not always visible at first, but one that gradually begins to reveal itself through something many people now experience without fully understanding: a quiet and persistent form of anxiety. When people think about productivity, they usually imagine efficiency, better time management, better systems, better organization. But very few people talk about the emotional side of productivity culture. And yet, for many individuals, the pressure to remain productive has quietly transformed into something much heavier: a constant psychological tension. It begins subtly. At first, it is simply the feeling that there is always something else that needs to be done. You finish one task, and almost immediately another appears. A message arrives, a new responsibility emerges, a deadline approaches. The mind rarely experiences the feeling of completion. Instead, it exists inside a permanent state of anticipation. What needs to be done next? What have I forgotten? What am I falling behind on? Over time, this state begins to create a quiet form of anxiety that many people carry with them throughout the day. Not the sharp anxiety that comes from a sudden crisis, but a softer, more persistent form. A background tension that never fully disappears. It follows people into their evenings, into their weekends, even into moments that should be restful. You sit down to relax, yet part of your mind continues scanning for unfinished tasks. You check your phone one more time, just in case something important has appeared. This habit may seem harmless, but the psychological effect is profound. Because the mind is never allowed to fully disengage, even during moments of rest, a part of the brain remains connected to the network of responsibilities that defines modern work. The result is a peculiar emotional state. You are technically resting, but you do not feel rested. You are physically still, but mentally active. Your attention drifts back toward obligations, toward notifications, toward the endless list of things that still remain undone. This phenomenon has become so common that many people now assume it is simply part of adult life. But the human mind was never designed to exist in this state indefinitely. Psychologically, human beings require periods of genuine detachment from work, moments when attention can move freely without being pulled back toward productivity, moments when the mind is allowed to wander without purpose. These periods of mental idleness play a crucial role in emotional health. They allow the brain to reset, to reorganize experiences, to recover from the cognitive demands of focused work. Without them, something begins to happen that is both subtle and powerful. Mental fatigue accumulates, not the fatigue of physical effort, but the fatigue of unresolved attention. Too many tasks, too many responsibilities, too many unfinished loops occupying the mind, each one demanding a small portion of mental energy. Individually, they may seem insignificant, but together they create a heavy cognitive burden. The mind becomes crowded, thoughts overlap, focus becomes difficult to sustain, and gradually, the individual begins to feel something that is difficult to describe, but deeply familiar to many modern workers: a constant sense of being behind. No matter how much you accomplish, it never feels like enough. You clear your inbox, more messages arrive. You complete the project, another one replaces it. You organize your schedule, New obligations fill the empty spaces. The finish line keeps moving. And because the system never truly stops, the mind begins to interpret this endless movement as a personal failure. You begin to believe that if you were simply more disciplined, more focused, more efficient, you would finally catch up. But the truth is far more complicated. In many cases, the problem is not the individual. The problem is the structure of the system itself. A system designed to generate continuous activity cannot easily produce a feeling of completion. Its momentum depends on keeping everyone engaged, keeping everyone responding, keeping everyone moving. And within this system, something essential begins to disappear from the experience of work. Meaning, when work becomes a constant reaction to incoming demands, it becomes difficult to see the larger purpose behind what you are doing. Tasks begin to blur together. Days begin to resemble one another. And slowly, the sense that your efforts are building towards something meaningful begins to fade. This is the deeper psychological cost of productivity obsession, not simply exhaustion, but the quiet erosion of meaning itself. At this point, a strange contradiction begins to emerge. Modern society is more obsessed with productivity than at any other time in history. We have developed countless tools designed to help us work faster. Task managers organize every responsibility. Communication platforms allow instant collaboration. Artificial intelligence can generate information in seconds. By every measurable standard, we should be accomplishing more meaningful work than ever before. And yet, many people feel the opposite. They feel scattered, mentally exhausted, unable to focus long enough to produce something truly satisfying. This contradiction reveals what might be the most important insight about productivity culture. The system designed to maximize productivity may actually be reducing the quality of human accomplishment. To understand why, we must examine how meaningful work has historically been created. Throughout history, many of humanity's most important ideas emerged under conditions that look very different from modern work environments. Great writers spent long hours alone with their thoughts. Scientists devoted years to exploring a single question. Philosophers walked slowly through quiet environments, allowing ideas to evolve through sustained reflection. These breakthroughs did not emerge from constant responsiveness. They emerged from deep concentration, from uninterrupted thinking, from the patience required to stay with a difficult idea long enough for something new to appear. But modern productivity culture has quietly eliminated many of these conditions. Instead of depth, it encourages speed. Instead of patience, it encourages responsiveness. Instead of long periods of focus, it rewards the ability to move quickly between many different tasks. At first glance, this approach seems efficient. After all, more activity should theoretically lead to more results. But human cognition does not operate like a machine. The mind does not produce its most valuable insights under conditions of constant interruption. In fact, the opposite is usually true. The most meaningful work often emerges from periods that appear, from the outside, to be unproductive. A writer staring quietly at a blank page. A researcher contemplating a difficult problem for hours. An artist experimenting slowly with ideas that may not immediately succeed. To an observer focused purely on visible activity, these moments might seem inefficient. Nothing appears to be happening. No emails are being answered. No meetings are being attended. No rapid output is being produced. But internally, something essential is unfolding. The mind is exploring, connecting ideas, testing possibilities, allowing complexity to slowly reveal itself. This process cannot be rushed. It requires time. It requires silence. And perhaps most importantly, it requires the freedom to remain with a single problem without being pulled away by constant demands. Modern productivity systems rarely provide such conditions. Instead, they create an environment where attention is continuously divided. Even when someone attempts to focus deeply, the surrounding infrastructure encourages interruption. A notification appears. A message arrives. A meeting interrupts the flow of thought. Each interruption may seem small, But every interruption breaks the delicate continuity required for deep thinking. The mind must restart, reconstruct its train of thought, rebuild the mental context that had been slowly forming. Over time, this repeated disruption begins to change the type of work that individuals feel capable of producing. Complex projects start to feel overwhelming. Long-term thinking becomes more difficult. People begin gravitating toward tasks that provide immediate closure, answering messages, completing small requests, handling short-term obligations. These tasks offer a quick sense of completion, but they rarely lead to the kind of breakthroughs that define meaningful accomplishment. The result is a world filled with activity, but increasingly lacking in depth. People are working constantly, yet the work itself often feels fragmented, hurried, and strangely disconnected from larger purpose. This is the productivity paradox. The more aggressively we attempt to optimize human productivity, the more we risk eliminating the very conditions that allow meaningful productivity to exist. And once you begin to see this paradox clearly, an even deeper realization begins to appear. The problem may not be that people have become less capable of doing meaningful work. The problem may be that modern systems have quietly forced human beings to operate in ways that contradict the natural rhythms of the human mind. At the center of modern productivity culture lies a quiet assumption that human beings should function like machines. Machines do not need silence. They do not need reflection. They do not need time to wander through ideas or question the meaning of what they are doing. Machines simply execute instructions. Input leads to output. Efficiency increases when the machine runs continuously without interruption. But the human mind does not operate this way. The processes that lead to meaningful thought are far more delicate. They require something modern systems often overlook: mental space. Consider what happens when the mind is allowed to slow down, when there is no immediate pressure to respond, no incoming notifications demanding attention, no constant stream of tasks competing for mental energy. At first, this silence can feel uncomfortable. After spending years inside environments of constant stimulation, stillness may even produce a strange sense of unease. The mind searches for something to react to. It expects the next interruption. But if the silence continues long enough, something remarkable begins to happen. Thoughts deepen. Ideas begin connecting in ways that were previously impossible. Questions that once seemed confusing slowly start to reveal their structure. This is the environment in which creativity naturally emerges, not under pressure, not in the middle of a constant stream of distractions, but in moments when the mind is allowed to stay with an idea long enough for it to unfold. This is why many of history's most creative individuals placed enormous value on solitude. They protected time for thinking. They walked alone. They spent hours contemplating problems without the expectation of immediate results. To the modern observer, this behavior might appear inefficient, but it reflects a deeper understanding of how the mind actually works. Creative thought is not linear. It rarely appears on command. Instead, it develops gradually through exploration. The mind must move through uncertainty. It must examine ideas from different angles. It must occasionally wander into unexpected directions before discovering something valuable. This process cannot occur when attention is constantly redirected. Every interruption resets the mind's progress. Every demand for immediate response pushes thought back toward the surface. Over time, individuals begin adapting to these conditions. They stop attempting deep thinking altogether, not because they lack the ability, but because the environment no longer supports it. Work becomes mechanical, responsive, focused on completing tasks as quickly as possible, rather than understanding problems deeply. And slowly, the nature of work itself begins to change. Instead of producing thoughtful contributions, individuals become managers of incoming information, responding, forwarding, organizing, coordinating. These activities maintain the movement of the system, but they rarely produce the kind of intellectual breakthroughs that move ideas forward. The tragedy of this transformation is not simply that people feel more tired. It is that many individuals never experience what meaningful work truly feels like. The deep satisfaction that comes from solving a difficult problem. The quiet fulfillment of creating something thoughtful and complete. The sense that your attention has been fully engaged in something worthy of your effort. Without these experiences, work becomes hollow. It becomes something to endure rather than something to value. And when enough people begin to feel this way, an entire culture can quietly lose its connection to meaningful creation. But this story does not end here. Because once we understand the forces shaping modern productivity culture, a different possibility begins to emerge. A way of working that respects the limits of the human mind rather than ignoring them. Once you begin to see the hidden structure of productivity culture, something important becomes clear. Much of the exhaustion people feel today is not the result of personal weakness. It is the natural response of the human mind placed inside an environment that constantly pulls its attention apart. And if the environment is the problem, then the solution may not be found in forcing yourself to work harder. It may lie in changing the way you relate to productivity itself. This realization is both unsettling and liberating. Unsettling because it challenges a belief that many people have internalized since childhood, that being productive means always doing more. But liberating because it opens the possibility that meaningful work might require something very different. Doing less. Not less in the sense of laziness or avoidance, but less fragmentation, less constant responsiveness, less pressure to appear busy every moment of the day. In other words, meaningful productivity may require protecting the conditions that allow the mind to think deeply, conditions that modern work environments often unintentionally destroy. Consider the difference between shallow activity and focused effort. Shallow activity fills time. Focused effort produces progress. Shallow activity reacts to incoming demands. Focused effort moves intentionally toward a meaningful goal. The problem is that shallow activity is often easier to measure. A manager can see emails being answered. They can observe meetings being attended. They can monitor the constant flow of visible activity. But deep thinking is largely invisible. Someone sitting quietly with a difficult problem may appear inactive from the outside. Yet internally, that person may be doing the most valuable work of the entire day. The challenge, then, is not simply about managing time. It is about reclaiming attention, protecting periods of uninterrupted thought, allowing space for ideas to develop without the constant pressure of immediate response. This kind of resistance does not require abandoning productivity altogether. It requires redefining what productivity actually means. Instead of measuring success by the number of tasks completed, it becomes measured by the significance of what those tasks produce. Instead of maximizing activity, the focus shifts toward maximizing depth. This shift may sound simple in theory, but in practice, it requires a profound change in perspective. It requires accepting that meaningful work cannot always be rushed, that the most important ideas often take time to develop, that thinking itself is not a distraction from productivity, it is the foundation of it. When individuals begin to reclaim their attention in this way, something remarkable begins to happen. Work slows down, but the quality of work begins to rise. Ideas become clearer. Problems are understood more deeply. Solutions become more thoughtful and creative. And perhaps most importantly, the experience of working itself begins to change. Instead of feeling like a constant race against incoming demands, work becomes a deliberate process. A process of exploration, of creation, of intellectual craftsmanship. But this transformation does not happen overnight. It begins with a simple recognition that the modern obsession with productivity may have misunderstood what meaningful accomplishment actually requires. Once attention is reclaimed, something remarkable begins to return. Clarity. When the mind is no longer pulled in 10 different directions at once, it begins to recover a capacity many people have forgotten they once possessed. The ability to think deeply. At first, this may feel unfamiliar. After years of constant interruption, the mind needs time to readjust. Silence may feel strange. long periods of concentration may feel difficult. But gradually, something begins to shift. Thoughts become more coherent. Ideas start to connect. Problems that once felt overwhelming begin to reveal their structure. This is the environment where meaningful work emerges. Meaningful work rarely happens in frantic bursts of activity. It develops through patience, through attention, through the willingness to stay with a problem long enough for it to reveal something new. When individuals begin protecting their attention in this way, their relationship with work slowly transforms. Instead of reacting to an endless stream of small tasks, they begin focusing on fewer problems, but exploring those problems more deeply. Instead of measuring progress by the number of tasks completed, they begin measuring it by the quality of the insights they produce. This shift may appear subtle from the outside, but internally, it changes everything. Work becomes less mechanical, more thoughtful, more intentional. And with this change, something else begins to reappear. Satisfaction. Not the fleeting satisfaction of clearing a notification or responding to a message, but the deeper satisfaction that comes from seeing a complex idea slowly take shape. From solving a difficult problem that required patience and concentration. From creating something that did not exist before your attention brought it into being. These experiences remind us of something modern productivity culture often forgets. Human beings are not simply task-completing machines. We are meaning-making creatures. We derive fulfillment not merely from activity, but from contribution, from the sense that our efforts are building towards something real, something thoughtful, something lasting. And yet, for many people, this experience has become increasingly rare, not because they lack talent, not because they lack intelligence, but because the structure of modern work rarely gives the mind enough space to reach this deeper level of engagement. The constant movement between tasks keeps attention at the surface. It prevents ideas from reaching their full depth. Reclaiming meaningful work, therefore, begins with a simple but powerful decision: to value depth over speed, to value focus over constant responsiveness, to value thoughtful creation over visible busyness. This decision may feel radical in a culture that celebrates relentless activity, but it reflects a truth that has always existed beneath the surface of human accomplishment. The most meaningful contributions are rarely produced quickly. They are produced slowly, through patience, through attention, through the quiet persistence of a mind willing to stay with a problem long enough to truly understand it. And when individuals begin working in this way, something deeper begins to return to their lives. A sense that their work is not simply filling time, but shaping something meaningful. At the beginning of this video, we asked a simple question: why do so many people feel exhausted, even when they are doing everything productivity culture tells them to do? Why does modern work often leave people feeling busy, yet strangely unfulfilled? By now, the answer may be becoming clear. The problem is not that people have become less disciplined. The problem is that the modern idea of productivity has quietly misunderstood what meaningful accomplishment actually requires. For years, we have been told that productivity means doing more tasks, more communication, more activity, more visible movement. But the human mind was never designed to operate in a state of endless acceleration. It was designed for rhythm, for cycles of effort and rest, for periods of deep concentration followed by moments of reflection. When these rhythms disappear, the mind begins to experience the consequences. Focus becomes fragile, creativity becomes rare, work becomes mechanical, and life begins to feel like an endless sequence of obligations rather than a meaningful pursuit. This is the lie hidden inside modern productivity culture, that constant activity leads to meaningful accomplishment. In reality, the opposite is often true. Meaningful accomplishment usually requires the courage to slow down, to resist the pressure of constant responsiveness, to create space for thought in a world that rewards reaction. It requires protecting attention as one of the most valuable resources a human being possesses. Because attention shapes everything. It shapes what we notice, what we understand, what we ultimately create. When attention is fragmented, our work becomes fragmented. But when attention is protected, something powerful becomes possible. Depth. The kind of depth that allows ideas to grow beyond the surface. The kind of depth that allows individuals to create work that truly matters. And perhaps most importantly, the kind of depth that allows a person to feel connected to what they are doing. Not simply busy, but engaged. Not simply productive, but purposeful. So the next time you feel overwhelmed by the endless pressure to do more, it may be worth asking a different question. Not how can I become more productive, but something far more important. What kind of work is actually worth my attention? Because in the end, a meaningful life is not built by filling every moment with activity. It is built by choosing carefully what deserves the limited attention we are given. And once you begin to see productivity in this way, the goal of work quietly changes. It is no longer about doing more. It becomes about doing what truly matters. If this idea resonates with you, share your thoughts in the comments. When was the last time you experienced truly deep focus while working? And if you want to explore more ideas about psychology, attention, and the hidden forces shaping modern life, consider subscribing for future videos. Because understanding how the mind works may be one of the most important steps toward reclaiming control of your life.